Chapter 1: The Marketplace of Wisdom. In the bustling bazaar of ancient Damascus, the air was thick with the scent of spices, cinnamon, saffron, and cardamom mingling to create an intoxicating aroma. The chatter of merchants echoed through the narrow pathways, interspersed with the clinking of coins and the melodic calls of vendors advertising their wares. Textiles in every imaginable hue were draped over stalls, catching the sunlight like a painter's palette brought to life. This was no ordinary market, it was a crossroads of civilizations, where traders from as far as China and Rome met to exchange not only goods but ideas, beliefs, and stories. Amid this vibrant tapestry of activity stood a modest stall that appeared understated compared to its more opulent neighbors. Its keeper, Hafiz, was a man of middle years with a scholarly air about him. His stall overflowed with books, scrolls, and ancient manuscripts, their leather bindings cracked with age and their edges gilded with care. While others sold spices or silk, Hafiz dealt in the currency of wisdom. He was not merely a seller of texts, but a seeker of knowledge, a man who believed that every written word held the potential to unlock the mysteries of the human experience. One morning, as the first rays of sunlight filtered through the dusty air, Hafiz busied himself arranging his collection. He had just unrolled a rare scroll from Alexandria when he noticed a peculiar figure leaning against his stall. The man was elderly, his long, snow-white beard spilling onto a cloak of matching hue. Despite his age, his eyes gleamed with a youthful intensity, as though they had witnessed lifetimes of stories yet remained eager for more. "Good morning," the stranger said, his voice carrying the weight of wisdom and the warmth of familiarity. "I see you are a keeper of treasures that few understand." Hafiz smiled, intrigued. "And you, sir, seem to be a man who appreciates such treasures." The man introduced himself as Ishaq, a wandering scholar from the fertile lands of Mesopotamia. Draped across his chest was a satchel, from which he drew a leather-bound tome. Its cover was adorned with intricate patterns, and its pages, though yellowed with time, bore the unmistakable craftsmanship of a scribe's careful hand. "This," Ishaq said, holding the tome as one might cradle a precious artifact, "is a collection of proverbs from across the ancient world. Each proverb is not just a saying but a story, a fragment of history distilled into wisdom." Hafiz's eyes widened. Proverbs are the foundation of our understanding. They carry truths that transcend time and place. "Would you share one with me?" Ishaq nodded, his expression turning serious. "Proverbs," he began, "are not mere words. They are the echoes of lives lived, lessons learned, and choices made. Let me tell you the story behind one of my favorites." With a deliberate motion, he opened the tome, its pages whispering secrets of the past. His finger stopped at a phrase written in elegant calligraphy: "A bird in the hand is worth two in the bush." Chapter 2: The Hunter's Dilemma. This saying, Ishaq began, his voice taking on a storyteller's cadence, originated in the verdant forests of ancient Persia, a land where hunters and farmers relied on the bounty of nature for their survival. The tale begins with a young hunter named Arman, whose skill with the bow was matched only by his ambition. The listeners at Hafiz's stall leaned closer as Ishaq continued, painting the scene with words. Arman lived in a small village nestled at the edge of a vast forest. The people of the village depended on hunters like him to bring back game, and Arman's prowess had made him a local hero. His arrows flew true, and his quarry was always plentiful. Yet, despite his success, Arman's heart harbored a restless desire for greatness, to achieve something that would set him apart from all who had come before. One crisp morning, as the sun cast its golden light over the forest canopy, Arman set out on a hunt. He moved with the stealth of a predator, his bow slung across his back and his keen eye scanning the underbrush for movement. Hours passed, and just as he began to tire, he spotted a golden pheasant perched on a low branch. Its feathers shimmered like molten sunlight, and Arman knew at once that this bird was a rare prize. The villagers would marvel at such a catch, and his name would be remembered for generations. Arman narked an arrow, his heart pounding with anticipation. He drew back the bowstring, his focus unyielding. But just as he was about to release, a rustling sound caught his attention. Turning his head slightly, he saw two more pheasants foraging in the underbrush. They were not as dazzling as the golden bird, but together they represented a greater bounty. Faced with this unexpected choice, Arman hesitated. The golden pheasant was within his reach, a certainty. But the two in the bush, though riskier, promised a greater reward. His mind raced as he weighed the options. Should he secure the prize he could see or gamble for the possibility of more? Driven by ambition and greed, Arman made his decision. He turned his bow toward the two pheasants in the bush, determined to claim them both. He crept forward, his movements slow and deliberate, the dry leaves beneath his feet betraying not a sound. But as he took his final step, a dry twig snapped beneath his weight, the sharp crack splitting the stillness of the forest. In an instant, all three birds took flight, their wings beating furiously as they vanished into the sky. Arman stood frozen, his bow lowered, the enormity of his mistake sinking in. He had lost everything. The golden pheasant that had been so close, the two in the bush that had tempted him, all gone. His heart sank as he realized the truth of his folly. In reaching for too much, he had ended up with nothing. When Arman returned to the village, his empty hands were met with puzzled looks and hushed whispers. The elders, wise from years of observing the capriciousness of life, listened to his tale and nodded knowingly. They began to repeat the lesson Arman had learned that day: a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush. The saying spread throughout the village, becoming a mantra of prudence and caution. Over time, it traveled beyond the forest, carried by merchants and travelers who recognized its universal truth. Ishaq paused, allowing the weight of the story to settle over his audience. And so, he said, what began as a hunter's moment of folly became a timeless lesson, a reminder to value what we have rather than risk it all for uncertain gains. Hafiz nodded thoughtfully, the tale stirring something deep within him. Around them, the crowd murmured, their faces reflecting a mixture of awe and understanding. Ishaq's words had resonated, the simple yet profound truth of the proverb touching each person in a unique way. It is a lesson, Hafiz said finally, not only for hunters but for all who walk through life, tempted by the glitter of the unattainable. Chapter 3: The Sailor's Folly. As the murmurs subsided, Hafiz leaned forward eagerly. Another tale, Ishaq, he urged. Surely the world of Proverbs holds many more lessons for us. Ishaq's lips curled into a knowing smile. Indeed it does, he said, turning the pages of his tome. He stopped at another phrase, its bold script catching the light: don't count your chickens before they hatch. This saying, Ishaq began, comes to us from the maritime republics of ancient Greece, where sailors' lives were governed by the whims of the sea. The story is of Lysander, a young mariner from the island of Rhodes, whose tale would forever remind us of the perils of premature celebration. The crowd listened intently as Ishaq described Lysander's world. Rhodes was a hub of seafaring trade, its harbors bustling with activity. Ships laden with goods sailed to and from the island, their crews braving treacherous waters for the promise of fortune. Lysander was no stranger to this life. He had grown up watching his father, a seasoned captain, navigate the waves with a mixture of skill and intuition. Lysander inherited his father's ship upon his passing and sought to make a name for himself. One fateful spring, he secured a lucrative contract to transport a cargo of rare spices and precious stones to Athens. It was the opportunity he had been waiting for, a chance to prove himself and amass wealth beyond his wildest dreams. Before the voyage began, Lysander, confident of his success, spread word of his venture throughout the island. He boasted of the riches he would earn and even began spending his future profits, purchasing fine clothes and promising lavish gifts to his friends and family. His confidence was infectious, and the people of Rhodes celebrated his anticipated triumph. The day of departure dawned bright and clear, the sea calm and inviting. Lysander and his crew loaded the ship with great care, ensuring the precious cargo was secured. As the sails unfurled and the ship glided out of the harbor, the townsfolk waved and cheered, already imagining the riches Lysander would bring back. For the first few days, the voyage was smooth. The sun shone brightly, and the winds carried the ship steadily toward Athens. Lysander, ever the optimist, spent his time dreaming of the life that awaited him upon his return. He envisioned grand feasts, accolades from the city's merchants, and a legacy that would cement his place in history. But as they neared the midpoint of their journey, the weather began to change. Dark clouds gathered on the horizon, and the once gentle winds turned harsh and erratic. The crew, seasoned sailors though they were, grew uneasy. Lysander, however, dismissed their concerns. "We've come too far to worry about a few clouds," he said, his tone laced with bravado. The storm struck with a fury none had anticipated. Waves rose like mountains, crashing against the ship and threatening to tear it apart. The crew fought valiantly to keep the vessel afloat, their shouts lost in the howling wind. Lysander, unprepared for such chaos, could only watch in despair as his dreams began to unravel. Hours later, as the storm subsided, the crew surveyed the damage. The ship had survived, but the precious cargo was lost, swept overboard by the relentless waves. Lysander, once so full of confidence, now faced the grim reality of his situation. He had counted his riches before they were secure, and now he had nothing to show for his efforts. When the battered ship finally returned to Rhodes, Lysander was met not with cheers, but with silence. The townsfolk, who had shared in his premature celebrations, now looked upon him with pity and disappointment. The lesson was clear: to celebrate a victory before it is achieved is to tempt fate. Ishaq paused, his gaze sweeping over his audience. "And so," he said, "the saying 'don't count your chickens before they hatch' reminds us of the dangers of overconfidence and the importance of patience. It is a lesson as true today as it was in Lysander's time." The listeners nodded, the weight of the story settling upon them. Hafiz, ever the scholar, added, "A reminder that life, like the sea, is unpredictable. We must navigate it with humility and caution." Around him, the crowd murmured their agreement, the timeless wisdom of the proverb resonating deeply. Chapter 4: The Gardener's Patience. As the sun dipped beneath the horizon, casting a golden glow across the marketplace, Ishaq turned another page in his tome. The audience remained captivated, eager for the next tale of wisdom. Hafiz, leaning forward with curiosity, urged him on. Ishaq's finger settled on a new proverb, written in bold and elegant script: "Patience is a tree whose root is bitter, but its fruit is sweet." He began with a deliberate tone. This saying, he explained, originates from the fertile lands of ancient Babylon, where the understanding of nature's cycles was as profound as the wisdom of its people. It tells the story of a humble gardener named Cave, whose unwavering patience would one day bear extraordinary fruit. The listeners leaned in as Ishaq painted a vivid picture. Cave lived on the outskirts of Babylon, known for its legendary hanging gardens. However, his plot of land was modest, no grand spectacle, just rows of vegetables and a few fruit trees. But Cave was no ordinary gardener. He treated his plants as one might care for their own kin, with patience and devotion. Among his trees was a pomegranate tree, known for its beauty but also for its finicky nature. Despite years of effort, Ishaq continued, the tree bore no fruit. Neighbors often mocked him as they passed, their laughter mingling with the rustle of the leaves. "Why waste your time on a barren tree?" they'd ask. "Plant something else and spare yourself the trouble." Cave only smiled and replied, "Patience is the gardener's greatest tool. This tree will reward me when its time comes." Seasons turned into years, and the pomegranate tree stood firm yet fruitless. The other plants thrived, providing sustenance and trade, but the barren tree remained a source of ridicule. Still, Cave cared for it, watering, pruning, and nurturing the soil around its roots. He often spoke to it softly, as if coaxing it to awaken. Then, one spring morning, as the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, Cave noticed something different. Tiny red buds had appeared on the branches of the pomegranate tree. Over the weeks, the buds transformed into flowers, and then, into fruit, plump, red, and bursting with sweetness. The neighbors, drawn by the sight of the ripened pomegranates, gathered around the once-mocked tree. They marveled at its transformation and asked Cave how he had accomplished such a feat. "Patience," Cave said with a warm smile. "Patience and faith in what is unseen." Word of the gardener's achievement spread throughout Babylon, reaching even the city's scholars. The story of the barren pomegranate tree became a parable for perseverance and hope. People began to echo Cave's words, "Patience is a tree whose root is bitter, but its fruit is sweet." Ishaq paused, letting the weight of the tale sink in. Cave's story reminds us that patience is not passive, but an active choice. It is a quiet strength that nurtures and sustains, even when the reward is unseen. Hafiz nodded, his eyes glistening with understanding. A lesson for anyone tending not just to gardens, but to dreams, relationships, and ambitions. The crowd murmured in agreement, the timeless truth resonating deeply. Ishaq's words had once again left a lasting impression on his listeners, a gentle reminder that in the fertile soil of patience, the sweetest rewards grow. Chapter 5: The Weaver's Thread. As the evening deepened and the flickering light of lanterns cast soft shadows over the marketplace, Hafiz found himself entranced by Ishaq's tales. Each one seemed to offer a new layer of meaning, a deeper understanding of life's intricate web. Hafiz, ever the scholar, was keen to hear what came next. Ishaq, sensing the growing anticipation, smiled knowingly and turned another page in his tome. "This next story," he said, "is one that comes from the weaving workshops of ancient Susa, in the heart of Persia. It is a tale about the delicate balance between effort and destiny, and how the threads of our lives are interwoven in ways we cannot always foresee. The crowd leaned in closer as Ishaq continued. The story is about a young weaver named Farid. He was born into a family of skilled artisans who had been weaving intricate tapestries for generations. The craft was in his blood, and from a young age, Farid was taught the art of weaving by his father, who was renowned for his skill in crafting the finest cloths. Farid, however, was not content to merely follow in his father's footsteps. He dreamed of creating tapestries that would surpass anything ever made before. His ambition burned brightly, and he often worked long into the night, trying to weave patterns that no one had ever seen. His father would often watch him with a concerned expression. "Patience, my son," his father would say. "Weaving is a slow and deliberate process. It takes time to create something of true beauty." But Farid was restless. He believed that if he pushed harder, worked longer, and moved faster, he could achieve greatness sooner. He began experimenting with new techniques, trying to innovate and break free from the traditional patterns that had made his family famous. Day after day, he worked feverishly, weaving at an incredible pace, eager to finish his latest creation. As the months passed, Farid's tapestry grew larger, its patterns more complex. But despite his best efforts, something was wrong. The threads were tangled, the patterns inconsistent, and the colors clashed. No matter how much he worked, the tapestry never seemed to live up to his expectations. One day, after yet another sleepless night of trying to fix his mistakes, Farid's father entered the workshop. He took one look at the tapestry and sighed. "You have worked hard, my son," he said, his voice filled with both pride and sadness, "but you have forgotten the most important lesson of weaving, the value of patience." Farid was frustrated. "But father, I've worked so hard. I've put everything into this tapestry. Why does it not turn out the way I envisioned it?" His father smiled gently. "You have forgotten that weaving is not just about speed or even skill. It is about understanding the rhythm of the loom, the delicate tension of the threads. You must allow time for the threads to settle, for the patterns to emerge slowly and naturally. Only then will you see the true beauty of your work." Farid's father then took the tapestry in his hands, gently unraveling the parts that had been done hastily, and began to weave again, at a deliberate pace. Farid watched, his frustration turning into awe, as his father's experienced hands worked in perfect harmony with the loom. The tapestry began to take shape in a way Farid had never imagined, its intricate patterns and harmonious colors coming together with ease. When the tapestry was finally complete, it was a masterpiece, one that would be admired by people from across the empire for generations to come. Farid had learned the hard way that haste could never replace the wisdom of patience. The work, like life itself, required time, effort, and a deep understanding of the process. Ishaq looked out over the gathered crowd, his eyes reflecting the quiet satisfaction of having shared yet another piece of wisdom. "And so," he said, "the Proverbs, the weaver's thread is woven slowly, but the fabric it creates lasts forever, spread throughout Persia, reminding people that the most enduring creations are those built with patience and care." Hafiz nodded in agreement. A lesson not just for weavers, but for all who seek to create something lasting. Whether it is a tapestry, a life, or a dream, the threads we weave must be done with patience, for only then will the final work be worthy of admiration. The crowd murmured in approval, their faces reflecting the deep understanding of the wisdom that had been shared. As the last rays of sunlight disappeared, the marketplace grew quieter, and the words of Ishaq lingered in the air like a sweet melody, reminding everyone that patience, in all its forms, was the key to lasting success.